The air was thick with ash, clinging to skin and lungs like a grim reminder of what had been lost. Commander Elias Kane pressed his back against the crumbling wall of what was once a bustling city square. Now, it was a graveyard of twisted steel and shattered dreams. The faint, acrid smell of burnt plastic and scorched earth lingered, cutting through the metallic tang of blood in the air. Somewhere in the distance, the mechanical hum of Zarnak drones echoed like a dirge. "Commander," whispered Sergeant Lila Arden, crouching beside him. Her voice was steady, but her wide eyes betrayed the fear she fought to suppress. She clutched a battered rifle, its grip worn smooth by desperate hands. "We've got 2 recon drones heading east. They're sweeping low." Kane's sharp gaze swept the ruins. The once iconic statue of a revolutionary leader now lay decapitated, its proud fist raised in defiance, only serving as a perch for scavenging birds. "They're probing for survivors," Kane said, his voice a low growl. "We don't have much time." He gestured to the scattered remnants of his team, no more than shadows in the wreckage. "Arden, get the wounded to the safe house. I'll draw their attention." Her brow furrowed. "Sir, with respect—" "That's an order," Kane cut her off, the edge in his tone like a blade. He softened, if only slightly, adding, "We can't lose more people today. Just move." The sergeant hesitated for half a heartbeat before nodding. "Yes, sir." She melted back into the ruins, her footsteps as silent as a thief in the night. Kane drew a deep breath, his chest rising against the suffocating weight of despair. Every movement felt amplified in the oppressive silence, the scrape of his boots on broken pavement, the whisper of fabric against the jagged edges of concrete. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small device, a rudimentary jammer cobbled together from salvaged parts. The resistance had no luxury of advanced technology. What they had was grit, and what grit couldn't fix, Kane made up for in sheer cunning. A flickering red light on the jammer warned him it was at the brink of malfunction. He muttered a silent prayer to a god he wasn't sure was still listening, and activated it. A sharp static buzz filled the air as the drones faltered mid-flight, their sleek forms hesitating like predators unsure of their prey. The moment didn't last. One drone whirred angrily, adjusting its course to investigate. Kane dove into a nearby alcove, the sharp sting of jagged glass biting into his palms as he scrambled for cover. A blinding blue light swept over the area, illuminating every crevice with an unnatural glow. The hum of the drone grew louder, more insistent, until it was a roar pounding in his ears. "Come on," Kane murmured to himself, clutching the pistol at his side. His grip was firm, though his fingers trembled ever so slightly. "Just a little closer." The drone tilted forward, its sleek, insect-like frame descending into the alley. Kane waited until it was mere feet away before springing into action. He fired once, a sharp crack that echoed through the ruins. The projectile struck true, shattering the drone's central sensor in a burst of sparks. The machine spasmed violently before crashing to the ground, its limbs twitching like a dying spider. Kane didn't wait to admire his handiwork. He sprinted through the rubble, his boots crunching on debris as the second drone gave chase. The air sang with the sharp hiss of energy bolts, each one missing him by inches, but close enough to make the hair on his neck stand on end. He vaulted over a collapsed pillar, his breath ragged, lungs burning with the exertion. Ahead, a faint shimmer caught his eye. A half-destroyed building with reflective panels still clinging stubbornly to its frame. Kane angled toward it, his mind racing. If he could lure the drone into the glass, it might mistake its reflection for a target. He slid into the building, his shoulder slamming against a support beam as he turned to face the entrance. The drone followed, its glowing sensor swiveling with mechanical precision. For a heartbeat, there was silence. Then it fired, the blast ricocheting wildly off the glass. The panel shattered into a cascade of shards, one of which embedded itself in the drone's processor. It crumpled to the ground with a final, pitiful whine. Kane sagged against the beam, his chest heaving. He wiped sweat and blood from his brow, the salty tang mixing with the coppery scent of his own wounds. "That was too close," he muttered. A faint crackle in his earpiece snapped him back to attention. "Commander, this is Arden. We're in position at the safe house." "Good," Kane replied, his voice steadier than he felt. Hold tight. I'll rendezvous soon. As he made his way back through the labyrinth of ruins, his mind churned with thoughts of the Zarnak. Their arrival had been as sudden as it was devastating, a fleet descending from the heavens like a plague, blotting out the stars with their monstrous ships. Their initial assault had crippled Earth's defenses, their weapons far beyond anything humanity could muster. And yet, Kane couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing something. For all their firepower and precision, the Zarnak seemed impatient, as though they had expected victory to come easily. It was arrogance, plain and simple. And if there was one thing humanity had learned, it was how to exploit arrogance. As he approached the safe house, a nondescript bunker hidden beneath the rubble of a collapsed library, Kane's earpiece crackled again. "Sir, we've intercepted another Zarnak transmission," Arden said, her tone urgent. "You need to hear this." Kane stepped into the dimly lit room, the smell of damp concrete mingling with the faint aroma of antiseptic. Arden handed him a tablet, the screen flickering with alien glyphs. A software program was translating in real time, the text appearing line by line. Earth's dominant species has capitulated, resistance minimal. Full resource extraction begins in 48 cycles. Kane's jaw tightened. "Dominant species," he murmured. "They think we're the only ones." A soft voice interrupted his thoughts. "They don't know about the others." Kane turned to see Dr. Nia Elson, her face partially obscured by a curtain of dark hair. She held up a notebook filled with detailed sketches and notes. "Earth isn't just humanity. The Zarnak don't realize how many intelligent species call this planet home. If we can prove it—" Her words trailed off, but the implication hung heavy in the air. Kane's lips curled into a grim smile. "If we can prove it," he repeated, "we just might have a chance." Outside, the wind howled through the ruins, carrying with it the faintest hint of hope. The low hum of the safe house generators filled the air like a restless heartbeat, steady but uneasy. Kane stood at the rusted table, his gaze fixed on the makeshift map sprawled across its surface. The dim light from the overhead bulb cast shadows over the hand-drawn routes, alien positions, and supply lines marked in smudged red ink. Dr. Elson's words from earlier hung in his mind like an unspoken challenge. They don't know about the others. He pressed his fingers into the edge of the table, the cool metal grounding him. Outside, the distant rumble of an alien patrol vehicle sent a faint tremor through the walls. The sound was almost rhythmic, a steady reminder that every moment counted. Arden entered, her boots scuffing softly against the concrete floor. The faint smell of dried sweat and oil clung to her, a testament to the Resistance's unyielding pace. She handed him a steaming tin mug. The bitter aroma of makeshift coffee wafted upward, sharp and acrid, but comforting in its own way. "They've set up a forward operating base 2 clicks north," she said, her voice clipped but low. "If we don't move soon, they'll solidify their position. It's now or never, Commander." Kane took a slow sip, the liquid burning its way down his throat. "We'll move," he said, setting the mug aside. "But not head on. We'll hit their supply convoys first. Make them bleed resources." "Another ambush?" Arden asked, her tone carefully neutral. "More than that," Kane replied. His fingers traced the map, stopping at a narrow canyon marked in blue. "We'll use the terrain against them. Force them into a bottleneck." She nodded, her jaw tightening. "Understood." The sound of a quiet cough broke their exchange. Dr. Elson stood by the doorway, her arms folded around her notebook. The faint scent of ink and paper clung to her like a relic of a world before the invasion. Her dark eyes flicked between them. "If you're planning to target their convoys, you might want to consider disrupting their oxygen filtration units," she suggested. Her voice was soft but carried the weight of thought. "Zarnak physiology relies on a specific atmospheric mix. Compromise that, and they'll have to divert resources to compensate." Kane's lips pressed into a thin line. "Risky," he said after a moment. "We'd be gambling on intel we don't fully understand." Elson stepped closer, her expression firm. They've already underestimated us, Commander. Let's make sure they regret it. Kane studied her for a moment, then nodded. Fine. Arden, prep the team. We move at dawn. The hours that followed were a whirlwind of activity. The resistance moved like phantoms through the ruins, their presence marked only by the faint scrape of boots on rubble or the muted clang of weapons being loaded. The air inside the safe house grew thick with the mingling scents of oil, metal, and determination. When dawn broke, its light was thin and pale, struggling to pierce the haze of smoke that blanketed the sky. The team moved in silence, their breaths visible in the chilly morning air. Kane led them through the wreckage, his senses attuned to every sound, every flicker of movement. The canyon loomed ahead, its jagged walls rising like the ribs of some long-dead beast. The faint rush of a stream echoed through the stillness, a sound almost alien in its serenity. Kane raised a hand, signaling for the group to halt. "They'll come through here," he said, his voice barely more than a whisper. "We hit hard and fast. No second chances." Arden nodded, her rifle already trained on the far end of the canyon. Beside her, a wiry man named Gareth adjusted the scope on his weapon. His hands were steady, his focus unshakable. Kane crouched behind a boulder, his eyes scanning the horizon. The minutes dragged on, each one weighted with the tension of anticipation. The wind shifted, carrying with it the faint hum of engines. Kane's heart quickened. "Positions," he ordered, his voice calm but firm. The first Zarnak vehicle appeared moments later, its sleek frame gliding through the canyon like a predator stalking its prey. The convoy followed, a line of 3 transports flanked by 2 heavily armed escorts. The vehicles gleamed with an unnatural sheen, their surfaces reflecting the muted light like liquid steel. Kane waited until the convoy was fully within the canyon before giving the signal. A sudden explosion rocked the air as Gareth's well-placed charge detonated, sending a plume of fire and debris into the sky. The lead vehicle lurched violently, its frame crumpling under the force. "Now!" Kane barked. Gunfire erupted, a deafening cacophony that shattered the canyon's stillness. The resistance fighters emerged from their hiding spots, their weapons spitting fire and smoke. The sharp tang of gunpowder mixed with the acrid stench of burning fuel. The Zarnak fought back with precision, their energy weapons searing through the air with a piercing whine. Kane ducked as a bolt of blue plasma struck the rock above him, showering him with jagged fragments. "Hold your ground!" he shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. Arden moved with practiced ease, her rifle picking off targets with deadly accuracy. Gareth provided cover fire, his shots calculated and deliberate. Kane focused on the convoy, his mind racing. They needed to disable the oxygen filtration units before the Zarnak could recover. He sprinted toward the nearest transport, his boots pounding against the rocky ground. The heat from the earlier explosion pressed against his skin like a smothering blanket. A Zarnak soldier emerged from the wreckage, its form towering and insect-like. Kane didn't hesitate. He fired twice, the sharp recoil jolting his arm. The alien collapsed in a heap, its exoskeleton smoking. The transport door was jammed, its edges warped from the explosion. Kane grabbed a crowbar from his pack, the metal cold and unyielding in his grip. He forced the door open with a guttural grunt, the sound of tearing metal grating in his ears. Inside, the transport was a tangle of machinery and alien glyphs. Kane spotted the filtration unit near the back, its cylindrical form pulsating faintly. He pulled a charge from his belt, his fingers moving with practiced efficiency as he armed it. The timer beeped softly, its sound barely audible over the din of battle. Kane planted the charge and turned to leave, but a sudden weight slammed into him, driving the air from his lungs. A Zarnak soldier loomed above him, its mandibles clicking menacingly. Kane fought back with everything he had. He drove his elbow into the alien's torso, the impact reverberating through his arm. The Zarnak retaliated, its claws raking across his side. Pain flared hot and sharp, but Kane refused to relent. He grabbed a shard of metal from the ground and plunged it into the soldier's neck. The alien shuddered, its body convulsing before going limp. Kane staggered to his feet, his breath ragged. He stumbled out of the transport just as the charge detonated, the explosion tearing through the vehicle with a thunderous roar. the air filled with the acrid scent of burning circuits and alien ichor. The convoy was in shambles. The remaining Zarnak forces began to retreat, their disciplined movements unraveling into chaos. Kane regrouped with his team, his body aching, but his resolve unbroken. "Mission accomplished," Arden said, her voice steady but edged with exhaustion. Kane nodded, his gaze fixed on the retreating Zarnak. "This is just the beginning," he said, his voice low but firm. "They'll come back harder, but so will we." Above them, the sky burned with the distant glow of alien ships, a reminder of the battles yet to come. The wreckage of the convoy smoldered in the distance, tendrils of acrid smoke curling into the ashen sky. Kane stood atop a jagged outcrop, his silhouette etched against the grim tableau. The wind carried the scent of scorched metal and alien ichor, mingling with the earthy tang of disturbed soil. His chest rose and fell with the rhythm of exhaustion, but his eyes burned with something fierce, something unyielding. "They're pulling back," Arden said from his flank, her voice as sharp as the fractured stones beneath their boots. She slung her rifle across her back, the metal catching a faint glint of the sun's weary rays. "Retreating faster than I expected." Kane didn't respond immediately. His gaze followed the faint trails of the Zarnak retreat, the distant hum of their transport engines barely audible above the whisper of the canyon wind. "They're not retreating," he said finally, his voice low, heavy with thought. "They're recalibrating." "Recalibrating?" Gareth muttered, crouched nearby as he examined a salvaged piece of alien tech. The device was still warm, its faint vibrations sending subtle tremors through his hands. "What does that even mean?" "It means they've realized we're not just pests," Kane replied, his tone sharper now, like steel drawn from a sheath. "We've made them bleed. They'll be back to crush us, but not without recalibrating their strategy first. And we'll be ready." He turned, the weight of the moment crackling in the tension between them. "Arden, get the wounded back to the safe house. Gareth, strip what you can from the wreckage and set charges to cover our tracks. I'll meet you back there." "And you?" Arden's brow furrowed slightly, her voice tempered with concern despite its briskness. "I've got something to check on," Kane said, already moving, his boots crunching over the rocky terrain. The journey back toward the Resistance's hidden headquarters was a labyrinth of shadow and silence. The air here was colder, carrying a biting edge that slipped under his collar and settled against his skin. The ruins seemed to breathe around him, their skeletal remains whispering stories of lives lost and futures stolen. The faint creak of shifting debris kept his pulse quickened, his senses on high alert. By the time Kane reached the subterranean entrance to the Resistance's hub, the dull ache in his muscles had settled into a persistent throb. The narrow passageway leading downward was lit by sputtering lamps, their dim glow barely holding the darkness at bay. He descended quickly, the smell of damp concrete and machinery growing stronger with each step. Inside, the atmosphere buzzed with muted urgency. The hum of generators underscored the low murmur of voices, punctuated by the occasional metallic clink of tools against parts. The Resistance was a patchwork of humanity's best and most desperate, a collection of soldiers, engineers, and civilians turned warriors. They moved with purpose, their faces lined with determination and shadows of loss. Kane found Doctor. Elson hunched over a table in a corner of the room, the pale light illuminating the scribbled notes and diagrams spread before her. Her dark hair was pulled back haphazardly, revealing the sharp angles of her face, her lips pursed in thought. The faint smell of ink and machine oil surrounded her, grounding the scene in tactile reality. "Elson," Kane said, his voice cutting through her focus. She glanced up, her eyes narrowing slightly before recognition softened her expression. "Kane, I assume the operation was a success?" "For now," he said, leaning against the edge of the table. His gaze flicked to the diagrams, detailed sketches of Zarnak physiology and technology. "I need an update on your work." Elson pushed a sheet toward him, the paper rustling faintly under her fingers. "We've confirmed that the Zarnak's filtration units are critical to their survival on Earth. Disabling them disrupts their entire operational structure, but it's only a temporary solution. If we want something more permanent—" She hesitated, her voice trailing off as her eyes flicked to the side, as though the next words carried a weight she wasn't ready to share. Kane's gaze hardened. "What is it?" "There's something about their biology," she admitted, her tone measured but laced with unease. "Something they've engineered to adapt to environments like ours. It's sophisticated, but it has a flaw, a vulnerability we might be able to exploit." "Do you have specifics?" Kane pressed, his voice steady but insistent. "Not yet," she replied, her frustration evident. "But I'm close." Before Kane could respond, a young scout burst into the room, his boots slapping against the concrete floor. His wide eyes and labored breaths spoke volumes before he even opened his mouth. "Commander, we've intercepted another transmission. It's different this time." Kane straightened immediately, his senses sharpening. "How different?" "It's not just a status update," the scout said, thrusting a battered tablet into Kane's hands. "They're planning something big." Kane scanned the screen, his jaw tightening as the alien script translated into human language. The words painted a grim picture: escalation, reinforcement, and something called Protocol Theta. The meaning was clear enough. The Zarnak were preparing to end the resistance once and for all. "They're mobilizing their shock troops," Kane muttered, the phrase bitter on his tongue. "And they're not stopping there." Elson stepped closer, her presence a quiet weight at his side. "What does Protocol Theta mean?" "It means they're done playing," Kane said, his voice low and grim. "They're bringing out their full arsenal, and they're planning to wipe us out completely." The room seemed to grow colder, the faint hum of machinery now a distant drone in the oppressive silence. Arden approached, her expression tight but resolute. "Then we need to strike first," she said simply. Kane shook his head. "We don't have the resources for a full frontal assault. Not yet." "Then what's the plan?" Arden asked, her voice carrying the faintest edge of frustration. "We use the time we have left to prepare," Kane said, his tone brooking no argument. "We dig in, strengthen our alliances, and find a way to turn this Protocol Theta against them." He turned back to Elson. "And you. Whatever this vulnerability is, find it. If we're going to survive this, we need every advantage we can get." Elson nodded, her jaw set with determination. "I will." As the room buzzed with renewed urgency, Kane moved to the edge of the space, his mind a storm of calculations and possibilities. The faint crackle of the intercepted transmission still echoed in his thoughts, its ominous tone a constant reminder of the stakes. He looked out over his people, the weary fighters, the hopeful engineers, the determined civilians, and felt the weight of their survival pressing against him. The Zarnak had underestimated them before. That mistake had cost them dearly. But now the rules of the game were changing, and Kane knew that the days ahead would demand more than grit or strategy. They would demand sacrifice. Above, the sky darkened as the alien ships shifted into new formations, their presence like a vulture circling its prey. Kane's hands tightened into fists, the faint scent of smoke and ozone lingering in his nostrils. The storm was coming, and Kane would be ready. But deep in his gut, an unsettling thought churned. What if this was only the beginning? The Resistance's bunker was alive with a tension that rippled through the stale air, sharper than the metallic tang of exposed wiring and fuel canisters. Every corner hummed with controlled chaos, voices overlapping, boots thudding against concrete, the steady clatter of tools against steel. Kane stood at the heart of it, his arms crossed tightly over his chest as he surveyed the map projected onto the cracked wall. Lines of light traced the Zarnak's advancing positions, their movements methodical, relentless. "Protocol Theta means full deployment," Kane said, his voice carrying over the din like a command cutting through static. "They're going to hit us with everything they've got: shock troops, aerial units, orbital strikes. If we don't outthink them now, there won't be anything left to fight for." Arden leaned against the table beside him, her rifle resting within easy reach. "And what exactly do you suggest, Commander?" she asked, her tone even but edged with urgency. Kane's eyes flicked to the others gathered around the map. Elson, her notebook clutched like a lifeline, Gareth, still fiddling with the salvaged alien tech. A handful of resistance leaders whose names Kane barely had time to learn, but whose lives were now tied to his decisions. The weight of their gazes was palpable, a silent demand for answers. "We don't fight them head-on," Kane said, turning back to the map. His finger traced a series of symbols representing Zarnak installations. "We target their Achilles heel, logistics. Without supplies, their shock troops are just empty threats. We dismantle their operations from the inside out." A murmur rippled through the group, a mix of skepticism and grim acceptance. Gareth, his fingers still twirling a small alien device, tilted his head. "Sabotage their supply lines. Sure, but they're not stupid, Kane. They'll be guarding those routes tighter than a fortress." Kane nodded, the faintest hint of a grim smile tugging at his lips. "That's why we don't go for the obvious. We hit where they least expect it." He tapped the map again, this time pointing to a seemingly insignificant location near the edge of Zarnak territory. "This outpost is their fuel processing hub. It's smaller, less guarded, but critical to their operations. Without it, their ground units stall, and their aerial support is crippled." "Fuel's volatile," Arden said, straightening. Her eyes narrowed as she studied the map. "If we time it right, we could trigger a chain reaction, take out half their infrastructure in one strike." Kane nodded. "Exactly. But we'll need to divide their attention. A secondary team will create a diversion, something loud enough to pull their forces away from the hub." "I can handle the diversion," Gareth said, his voice light but resolute. He tossed the alien device from hand to hand, its glow reflecting faintly in his eyes. "You just make sure the main team finishes the job." Kane's gaze lingered on him for a moment before shifting to Elson. "And you? Any progress on that vulnerability?" Elson hesitated, her fingers tightening around her notebook. "I've confirmed the Zarnak's dependence on their filtration systems," she said, her voice quieter now but steady. "Disrupting their air supply won't just slow them down, it'll force them to retreat, at least temporarily. But implementing it on a large scale, we'll need access to their central network." Kane exhaled sharply through his nose, his mind racing. "Then we make it part of the plan. We'll take out the fuel hub and use the chaos to infiltrate their network. Elson, you'll oversee the upload. Arden and I will handle the strike team." The room fell into a tense silence, each member of the resistance absorbing their role in the plan. The faint hum of machinery filled the void, underscored by the distant rumble of artillery far above them. "All right," Kane said, his voice firm. "We move at dusk. Gear up." The sky burned with the deep reds and oranges of a dying sun as the resistance team moved into position. The terrain surrounding the fuel hub was a wasteland of cracked earth and twisted metal, the air heavy with the acrid stench of chemicals. Kane crouched behind a ridge, his eyes scanning the horizon through a pair of battered binoculars. The Zarnak outpost loomed ahead, its structure alien yet functional, with pulsating energy conduits snaking out like veins feeding a beating heart. "Arden, status," Kane murmured into his earpiece. "Diversion teams in place," came the reply, her voice crackling slightly through the interference. "Gareth's already playing with fire." As if on cue, a distant explosion ripped through the air, followed by the sharp whine of Zarnak alarms. Kane watched as several enemy patrols peeled away from the hub, their vehicles kicking up plumes of dust as they sped toward the source of the disturbance. "Perfect," Kane muttered. "Strike team, move in." They descended the ridge swiftly but carefully, their movements silent against the desolate landscape. The closer they got, the more oppressive the heat became, radiating from the fuel hub like a furnace. The faint hum of alien machinery vibrated in Kane's chest, a low, menacing thrum that seemed to resonate with the pulse of the enemy's lifeline. At the base of the hub, Arden signaled for the team to halt. She glanced at Kane, her expression sharp and focused. "Guards at the main entrance," she said quietly. "2 on the ground, 1 in the tower." Kane nodded, motioning to a pair of resistance fighters. "Take out the tower quietly. Arden, cover me." She gave a terse nod, her rifle already trained on the guards below. Kane moved forward, his steps light and deliberate. The sound of his own breathing filled his ears, mingling with the faint rustle of the wind against his gear. He reached the edge of the entrance just as the guards turned away, their alien chatter a rhythmic cadence of clicks and growls. Kane struck swiftly, his blade finding the soft joint between armor plates. The first guard crumpled soundlessly, its weapon clattering to the ground. Arden fired once. A sharp, muted crack, and the second guard collapsed, its body limp. Inside, the air was thick with the chemical stench of processed fuel. The corridors glowed faintly with the eerie light of alien conduits, their surfaces pulsating with an organic rhythm. Kane led the team deeper into the facility, his senses heightened, every shadow a potential threat. They reached the control room without incident, a sprawling space filled with alien consoles and holographic displays. Elson moved to the central terminal, her hands deftly navigating the unfamiliar interface. "This will take a few minutes," she said, her voice tight with concentration. "Keep them off me." As if summoned by her words, the first wave of Zarnak reinforcements arrived. The air filled with the high-pitched whine of plasma bolts, the acrid smell of burned ozone stinging Kane's nose. He ducked behind a console, returning fire with precise bursts. The recoil jolted his shoulder, but he gritted his teeth and held his ground. "Elson, how much longer?" Kane shouted over the chaos. "Almost there," she called back, her fingers flying over the controls. Sweat beaded on her forehead, glinting in the harsh light. Another explosion rocked the facility, this one closer. The walls shuddered, dust and debris raining down from above. Arden fired from her position, her shots calculated and deadly. "We need to move, Kane," she shouted. "Not until Elson finishes," Kane replied, his voice resolute. Finally, Elson straightened, her face pale but triumphant. "It's done! Fall back," Kane ordered, covering their retreat as the team raced back through the corridors. The sound of alien alarms and the sharp tang of burning fuel followed them, a cacophony of destruction and survival. As they emerged into the open air, the hub erupted behind them, a towering inferno of fire and smoke. Kane turned, his chest heaving, as the flames lit the night sky. For a moment, the weight of victory pressed against him, heavy and fleeting. But in the distance, the faint hum of Zarnak ships reminded him the war was far from over. The inferno of the fuel hub blazed behind them, its orange glow painting the night sky with streaks of fire and ash. Kane's boots pounded against the uneven ground as he led his team through the wreckage-strewn valley. The acrid stench of burning fuel clung to the air, mingling with the sharp metallic tang of spent plasma rounds. Every breath was a battle against the suffocating heat and the weight of their task. The Zarnak wouldn't delay. They'd already be regrouping. "They'll be on us in minutes," Arden said, her voice cutting through the heavy silence. Her face, streaked with grime and sweat, was a mask of resolve, but the tension in her shoulders betrayed the weight she carried. "They can try," Kane replied, his voice low, each word like steel tempered in fire. He turned to Elson, who clutched the data module against her chest as though it held the world's fate. "Do we have everything we need?" She nodded, her breath uneven but her determination unshaken. "Their filtration systems, command relays, even internal troop movements. If we can get this uploaded to the Galactic Council's network, the Zarnak won't just lose Earth. They'll face judgment across the stars." Gareth jogged up beside them, the faint glow of the burning hub reflected in his eyes. "Judgment's nice and all, but we've got a fleet of angry aliens breathing down our necks. What's the plan to keep our necks attached?" Kane's jaw tightened. "We hold them here, long enough for Elson to broadcast the data and make it stick." The words settled over the team like a heavy shroud. No one asked the question that hung in the air. They all knew what holding the Zarnak here meant. A faint tremor vibrated through the ground beneath them, growing stronger with each passing second. The distant hum of Zarnak engines became a thunderous roar as their forces closed in. Kane turned to the team, his eyes sweeping over each face. Arden's unwavering gaze, Gareth's defiant smirk, Elson's quiet resolve. They were his people, his responsibility. "They think they've already won," Kane said, his voice cutting through the growing cacophony. "They think we're nothing but a footnote in their conquest, but they've forgotten something. He drew in a breath, steadying himself. The heat of the flames, the weight of the coming storm, they were nothing compared to the fire in his chest. They've forgotten that when you corner humanity, we don't break. We rise. Arden's lips quivered with the barest hint of a smile. I hope they're ready for a reminder. The Zarnak appeared on the horizon, a wave of metallic precision and otherworldly menace. Their soldiers marched in synchronized ranks, their ships casting shadows that seemed to swallow the land. The air crackled with the sharp tang of ionized energy, the promise of destruction hanging like a blade over their heads. Kane raised his rifle, the weight of it familiar, grounding. Positions! We make this count! The resistance fighters scattered, finding cover in the twisted remains of the valley. The Zarnak forces advanced with unyielding precision, their weapons glowing with alien light. The first shot came from Arden, a sharp crack that echoed like a starting gun. A Zarnak soldier dropped, its towering form crumpling into the dust. The valley erupted into chaos. Plasma bolts sliced through the air, their searing heat forcing Kane to the ground as he returned fire. The acrid smell of burning ozone mixed with the metallic tang of blood, the sounds of combat, a deafening symphony of survival. Kane! Gareth's voice cut through the din. We've got incoming. 3 dropships northeast. Kane glanced at the horizon, his stomach nodding as he saw the sleek forms of the Zarnak dropships descending, their engines screaming like predators, diving for the kill. Arden, take the high ground. Gareth, cover her. What about you? Arden called, already moving to a better vantage point. Kane didn't answer. His focus was on Elson, crouched behind a crumbling piece of debris, her fingers flying over her tablet. The faint glow of the screen illuminated her face, beads of sweat trickling down her temple. How much longer? He demanded, his voice cutting through the chaos. 2 minutes, she replied, her tone strained but steady. I just need 2 more minutes. You've got 1, Kane shot back, firing into the advancing Zarnak forces. The recoil jolted his shoulder, the vibrations traveling up his arm, but he didn't falter. A plasma bolt struck the ground near him, sending a shockwave of heat and debris that stung his exposed skin. He gritted his teeth, refusing to let the pain slow him down. Gareth, status? Getting a little crowded here, Kane, Gareth shouted, his voice tinged with the adrenaline of near misses. Could really use a miracle. The miracle came not from above, but below. A series of explosions rippled through the valley as the charges Kane's team had planted during their earlier operations detonated. The ground shook violently, sending Zarnak soldiers sprawling. The air filled with the acrid scent of burnt machinery as several of their vehicles collapsed into smoldering wreckage. Arden's triumphant shout cut through the chaos. That's how you say hello! But the Zarnak weren't done. Their forces regrouped with mechanical efficiency, their advance more determined than ever. Kane's mind raced, calculating the seconds, the angles, the odds. They were running out of time. I've got it! Elson's voice rang out, sharp with relief. She stood holding the tablet aloft like a trophy. The broadcast is live. The Council will see everything. Kane felt a flicker of hope, but it was quickly extinguished as a new sound filled the air. A low, guttural hum that vibrated through the bones, sending a chill down his spine. He turned, his heart sinking as he saw the Zarnak flagship descending, its massive form blotting out the sky. The ship's main weapon began to charge, a pulsating light that grew brighter with each passing second. The heat it radiated was oppressive, like standing too close to an open furnace. Kane's mind raced. There was no time to retreat, no time to run. Elson, get out of here, he shouted, his voice raw. No, she replied, her eyes fierce. I'm not leaving. Go, Kane barked, cutting her off. That's an order. Elson hesitated for the briefest of moments before nodding, her expression pained but resolute. She turned and ran, the data module clutched tightly in her hands. Kane turned back to the flagship, his hands steady as he aimed his rifle. He knew the weapon was useless against something so vast, but it wasn't about winning. It was about defiance, about showing the Zarnak that humanity wouldn't go quietly. Commander? Arden's voice came through his earpiece, low and steady. What now? "Now," Kane said, a faint smile tugging at his lips, "now we remind them about rule number 1. He raised his rifle and fired, the sharp crack of the shot cutting through the oppressive hum of the flagship's weapon. A moment later, the weapon's charge faltered, flickering like a candle in the wind. Kane didn't have time to process what had happened before the flagship began to retreat, its engines roaring as it disappeared into the sky. Above, the faint shimmer of a galactic council ship appeared, its presence like a beacon of hope. A voice crackled through Kane's earpiece, unfamiliar but firm. "Resistance fighters of Earth, your broadcast has been received. The Zarnak will answer for their violations." Kane exhaled slowly, the tension in his shoulders finally easing. Around him, the resistance fighters began to cheer, their voices a mixture of relief and triumph. Kane sank to his knees, the weight of the battle finally catching up with him. As the sun began to rise over the battlefield, its light casting long shadows over the smoldering remains of the Zarnak's forces, Kane allowed himself a moment to breathe. They had won, not with superior weapons or numbers, but with ingenuity, determination, and the unshakable belief that Earth wasn't just a planet, it was a home worth fighting for.